we've got another student, Judith Verma.
Judith, excellent, thank you. So welcome, Judith. We're just asking everybody who joins to try to access the group chat window on the right-hand side of the screen. There's a speech bubble in the menu bar at the bottom to activate this, just to say hello and to confirm that you can hear what we're saying. Excellent. Yes, you can, Judith. Why not? Use up the airwaves.
Hi, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy. I have one question. I'm one of those people who hasn't submitted their dissertation proposal yet.
Okay.
So I'm obviously getting a little bit nervous. I was told, like on the email, Roger said that there would be meetings now bi-weekly until all the way through March and potentially first half of April for the mentors to be assigned. Is this still correct?
That's great. Yeah. So the next one is on the 30th of March.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's actually one very soon after that on the 6th of April.
6th of April. Okay, that's when I plan latest to submit it. All
Okay.
right. Yeah, that was the most important I wanted to know.
Yeah, and are you aware, Judith, of the other webinars that we've done on writing your dissertation proposal?
Yes, I've participated in them. Well, in the first one,
Okay.
and I believe the second one, it said that it would basically be the same than the first, so I didn't.
It was me doing it instead of Roger, so
Yeah.
it wasn't recorded. We were just trying to soak up a few extra students who hadn't accessed the first one.
Right. Okay. No, I did. I mean, I think my problem is similar to many of those who haven't submitted, that, it's very hard to nail down a topic without engaging in professional conversation with someone before. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, to be honest, a lot of the times what we advise when people talk about this is that because the dissertation committee meeting is actually meeting every 2 weeks, your chance to engage is actually with your initial proposal form. So, you will automatically get very quick feedback from that to point you towards, a better form if it's not immediately accepted. So it is a good way of engaging with the sort of the three of us on the committee and getting some decent feedback to help to push you along. So
okay, maybe
some people feel they've got to have an absolutely perfect proposal right at the start, but it's not the case for probably 50% of the students. So.
Okay, well, I've I'm sure you want to start. Maybe one quick follow-up, because this question was asked on the Blackboard before, but not really answered. See, my expectation is that whatever title I submit for the proposal and whatever I write there is basically what I have to do, because this is what will be accepted or not. My problem is that I know the area I want to write in, but to really limit it to a question and the structure is the hard part. So can we go back on this? Can we even change the title in discussion with our assigned mentor, or the complete, the direction of the thesis later?
Well, Isla may add to this, but I think the answer to that is yes, within reason. But of course, we are accepting a proposal on a subject and a particular title. There's room for manoeuvre, as you say, in agreement with your supervisor. But if it's a complete and utter change, then it may not be sort of so comfortable for us. But I guess any change we should be aware of.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm gonna mute myself now and let
you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, well, I think we should probably get started. Hopefully some more people will join us as we go along. So I think the format, this is the first time we've actually done one of these writing skills webinars. So the format for this is I'm going to talk through a presentation to basically go through the basics of academic writing, how to write a dissertation, what the general expectations are. Isla Gemmell is with us until about 4:30. Whilst I'm talking, she will be able to answer your questions, your textual questions, in the group chat section. And given that there's so few of us, I think feel free as well to put your microphones on and stop me as I'm talking and ask questions. Okay, so okay, so as I've explained, there's a chance to ask questions in the group chat button on the right whilst I'm talking. And every time I try to get started, of course, somebody else joins the meeting, which is absolutely fine. It just looks like we're going to be slightly delayed by 10 minutes or so. So welcome, Faye. I believe you've just joined. I hope you can hear me. As I've explained to everybody else, I was just about to start on a presentation. There's not too many of us, so people should feel free to ask questions. But Isla is sat with us, and she's answering questions within the group chat facility on the right-hand side of the screen, which hopefully you can have access to. And just to be sure of that, it would be good actually if I think Grace has just joined us as well. If everybody who's joined us can actually say hello within the group chat section, just so that we know that everybody can hear us and that you can actually use this facility. Okay, so Shozab, thank you for saying hello. It would be excellent if both Faye and Grace could now switch on their group chat and simply say hello, just so that we know that you're there and can ask questions as we go through. And after that, I'm definitely going to start on the presentation. It is St. Patrick's Day, and we're all sober. Okay, so excellent. So we're kind of up and running. Isla's already answering questions, as you can see. And Grace has said hello. Excellent. Welcome back, Grace. Okay, so I think we have a reasonable number now. I may break if anybody else joins, but I'm going to try to move on with the presentation, largely because we only have Isla for the next 20 minutes or so. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see these slides now. Please shout if you can't. Okay, so this webinar is literally about writing skills for dissertations. I'm going to go through in a fairly systematic fashion and talk about the sections that are required within a dissertation and the general expectations from examiners and for academic writing in general. Okay, so the general structure of a dissertation, the standard structure, you would have an introductory section, which includes your literature review, a section which explains your methods, another section for results. I should say chapters rather than sections, actually. Chapter for introduction, chapter for methods, one for results, one for discussion, and then that would be followed by all of your references and then appendices. And I'll now explain these sections in slightly more detail. Okay, so your introduction. Your introduction, like every other chapter, is absolutely essential. This provides all the context for your current study and an overview of the research problem. So you're asking a particular research question. We need to know what the basis of that question is. What research have you done to work out why this problem is worth exploring? You know, and where does your particular question that you've honed down, where does it actually fit in with the current body of knowledge? You know, what gaps have you identified? Why are you asking this question? You know, where does it sit? And this section is also an opportunity for you to clearly, very clearly, at the end of the sections, state your aims, objectives, and hypotheses. And I can't stress this strongly enough, because whatever you state as those aims and objectives, the rest of the document will be judged on the basis of how well you're answering that particular research question and those aims. Okay, so it's very important. This could be a lengthy section, but be careful not to make it too lengthy. Generally for MPH students, you have between 10 and 15,000 words. We don't put a word limit on each individual chapter, but occasionally people do make the mistake of going to town basically on this section and writing far too much, and it's not good for the examiner. It tends to contain superfluous information, and it doesn't leave quite enough room for the rest of the document. So it needs to be, you know, reasonably comprehensive in terms of your literature review, and reasonably lengthy, but you can discuss with your supervisor about an appropriate length. Okay, so within the introductory section, you have your literature review. And this defines and limits the problem that you're working on. So you all have done evidence-based practice on this course, and this entire section really needs to be based on existing evidence. So this is not about using anecdotal evidence or stating opinions. You're telling us what evidence is already out there that defines the problem that you're looking at. Okay. Absolutely essential to say that your literature review needs to be a critical review, not just a list. Okay, this is not just a numbers game. It's not just an opportunity to refer to and cite as many papers as possible. Obviously, too few is not good either, but you're not going to impress anybody by simply listing lots and lots and lots of papers. What you will impress examiners by is if you critically review the evidence that's already out there. Okay, so ideally we'd want to be comparing and contrasting different views. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're just looking for views that support your own case or the angle that you're taking on this subject. You're trying to show us exactly what evidence is out there, and if that contains contrasting views, well, we need to know about that. Okay, if you may need to or want to assess the methodology and applicability of the studies that you're citing. So it's very easy to find papers, to look at their results. The results, because of the way the studies were carried out, perhaps the population it relates to, perhaps because of the methodology, may or may not apply to the question that you're asking. So again, be critical of the literature that you've sourced and assess them accordingly. Okay, again, so if there's areas of disagreement within the field, it's good to highlight that. And essentially, you need to be highlighting gaps in current knowledge. If your literature review tells us that everything that anybody needs to know on the subject has already been covered, well, where does your current piece of work fit in? Okay, so ideally you'll be highlighting gaps in current knowledge, and this should be where your piece of work is slotting in. Okay, so you need to clarify the relationship between your work and published work. So you're not just listing or critically assessing existing work. You're trying to place your own work and your own research question within the context of that work. Okay, so apply references to statements and be clear when quoting directly. So I think this could be covered in the reference section, but because this is the chapter where you'll be making most of your citations, it's just important to say any statements that you make have to be evidence-based and therefore cited. Okay, there's not just a chance to express opinions, and be clear when you're quoting directly. Okay, if you're actually using a sentence or potentially a section, a paragraph from existing work, make sure that goes into quotes. There's two reasons for that. One is it need to be absolutely clear if you're quoting from somebody rather than interpreting their work. And also from this year forward, your dissertations will be given in digital format, so they will be put through a plagiarism check. Okay, so we will be able to see where whole sentences, whole paragraphs actually match existing work. If they've got quotes around them, that's absolutely fine because you've already told us that they're from existing work. If not, you're running the risk that it looks like you're trying to make out that these are your words. Okay, so just be very, very careful with that. Methods. I've put a structure here which is probably more suitable to a standard quantitative report, in which case, perhaps if you're collecting your own data, so you need to tell us about the study design, sampling, power, any instruments used to collect the data, and quality control issues on the data collected. Of course, for this particular project, for the MPH dissertation, you're not allowed to collect primary data, so this may not be quite so applicable. But if your chosen form of dissertation is a grant proposal, then actually all of the above is still applicable, because you've got to tell us how you would design the study, how you would sample, whether that sample has sufficient power, what instruments you would use, etc., etc., and along with a costing for that design. If you're doing a systematic review, then you need to explain in great detail your exact search strategy. So which keywords are you using and why are they chosen? Which databases are you searching? What restrictions have you applied? Because of course, for the MPH, you'll be doing an adapted systematic review rather than a full systematic review. And how you intend to, or how you have assessed the quality of the papers within your review. Okay, if it's a public health report format that you're writing, then you need to define the problem. Tell us how you define a problem. You need to tell us what your evidence base is and how you apply this to the situation that you're writing about. Okay. Results. Now, okay, so the results section is a report of your study findings, specifically without interpretation. This is one of the aspects of academic writing that, depending on the writing that you're used to, can be one of the most awkward to get around to, especially if people are used to working on public health reports. And I certainly had similar issues with this myself. In a lot of reports, you will present results and interpretation within the same sections. For academic writing, your results are simply your results with no interpretation attached to them. It feels a very cold format, but that's the way it has to be. The interpretation comes later.
Andrew?
Oh, yes, Judith?
Sorry, can you go a little bit more into, I'm not following exactly. So the results section, if I write a public health report, are the results of the literature that I'm reviewing, but I'm only discussing it in the next section. Is that right?
Yeah. The discussion is where you actually apply meaning to what you've found. Okay, an interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the results section is where you would have any of your tables and graphs. I'm going to talk about these in a later section in terms of making sure that they are appropriate. Clarity of primary findings. You need to be very, very clear of what your primary findings are. If you've actually gone down the road of asking a number of research questions, then it's very important to know what are the primary questions and which are the secondary questions, to separate those out sufficiently and to make this very, very clear to the reader and to the examiner. Don't make sure that your primary findings are not lost within lots of other findings. Okay, and use the appendix if necessary. For most of you, this wouldn't necessarily be the case, but it may be for a systematic review. It may be for a quantitative report. You may have tables of output, tables of data, which are appropriate and relevant to your findings, but are very, very cumbersome, large, or numerous. If that's the case, they can simply be put in an appendix and referred to clearly within your results section. Okay, yeah, and one note to say, a grant proposal. You may, I think within your dissertation handbook, you have an idea of the marking structure that we use for dissertations and the proportion which is applied, proportional marks which is applied to each section. So you may notice that the results section, I think, has a 20% allowance applied to it. If you're doing a grant proposal, you won't necessarily have any results. Now, the guidance does suggest that you can project the results, or at least project the type of results that you expect. So that is the nature of the results rather than the actual results themselves. And you'll be judged on this. But of course, for a grant proposal, your results section may be very small compared to other formats. And this is taken account of within the way that we mark them. Okay. Okay, so the discussion. This is where all of your interpretation comes in of your results. And I've said it exposes the core of your study, which is certainly true, because this is where everything comes together. You could say that other sections are to some extent systematic, follow a format, but the discussion is where you need to make sense of everything that you've done, why it's been done, and what your findings actually mean. Okay, so it's standard format to start with a brief summary of your primary findings. And as I've just said, then you need to discuss them and explain exactly what they mean and how they fit into current knowledge. So don't discuss them in isolation. Try to discuss them in relation to in relation to existing evidence that you've already discussed in your introductory section. So we can see this, the discussion section is completing the circle. In your introductory section, you've told us what knowledge already exists and what you intend to do to add to that knowledge. In the other sections, you've told us how you went about producing those findings and what those findings are. And now we come full circle and you say what they mean and how they fit into the review that you did right at the start. Okay, this is where you need to draw conclusions to wrap up your work. I'm making this all sound very simple. Obviously, it isn't always the case. Yeah, don't introduce new concepts here. Very easy trap to fall into when you're writing the discussion, because you're thinking so much about what your findings mean. It's very easy to come up with new ideas and new angles on your findings, but you cannot suddenly add extra detail into your discussion. You're free to go back and rewrite your aims or add additional aims and include these in the methods and findings, but do resist the temptation to simply add additional findings or concepts in with the discussion. Okay, and you need to include limitations. Okay, this is a master's dissertation. It's not necessarily a perfect piece of work. It's not necessarily a perfect study or a description of perfect data, but you need to show us that you understand and accept the limitations on this data and the limitations that your findings impose on your ability to make conclusions based on those. Okay, so you're not putting your study down by being honest about its limitations. You're just showing that you've considered them fully, and this is a very important section to include. Referencing, vitally important. Very easy to get right, very easy to get wrong, and it's probably one of the things, if you do it wrong, that annoys examiners the most. So there's generally two styles accepted at the University of Manchester, which is either Harvard or Vancouver. And as we tried to show in this slide, Harvard is a format where you give us the first author or all the authors, or the first two authors, and a year. Within Vancouver, it's a numeric format. So under Harvard, your bibliography is in alphabetical order. Under Vancouver, it's numeric according to the point at which those citations appear in the document. Okay, use software. I suppose I shouldn't, everybody does these days, but I probably shouldn't presume it, but it can make your life so much easier. I believe Mendeley is the software which is promoted on this course. There are other ones such as EndNote and Reference Manager. They all do a very similar thing. You can access Mendeley for free, and as I say, it's the one that we recommend. So best to stick with that. As I said, they can make your life so easy. You're going to be doing a lot of searching for literature, and from most databases now, you can export all the information from any source straight into one of these pieces of software. So they then appear in your database, and when you're writing, it's a click of a button or two clicks of a button, a shortcut to actually insert the citations, which are then automatically included in your bibliography at the back of the section. And of course, then these can be updated automatically, so you can save yourself hours of fun by using one of these. Okay, be consistent in your referencing format throughout. Once you've chosen one, stick with it. We only need one bibliography. I think I've noticed this year, perhaps in previous years, from dissertation proposals, a number of you tend to favour a format where there's a number of different bibliographies, perhaps pertaining to each chapter. We wouldn't recommend that. We'd recommend one single bibliography. Oh, yes, and websites. It's obviously more common these days to quote from websites. That's perfectly acceptable as long as you're not basing the majority of your evidence from websites. You may use them occasionally. But if that's the case, make sure that you give us the full address of that website and when it was accessed. Okay. So just to state the obvious to some extent, all cited work must be in the bibliography. Okay, so an examiner will notice if you have a reference which is not replicated in the bibliography, because they may use that reference to go to look for the full title, to go and read the document, and they will certainly notice if it's not there. And the other way around, all work which is in the bibliography must be cited. Okay, so the bibliography is not a list of everything that you might have read in preparation for this project. It's a list of the work that you have cited within the document. Okay, the appendix. Again, looking at this, most of these probably don't apply to many people because they largely apply to primary data collection. So if you were doing a kind of study where you were actually collecting your own data, things like the questionnaires that were used, instruments within those questionnaires, consent forms that were needed, etc., would all go in the appendix for additional information. But there may be other materials which apply to your particular project, which can go in the appendix. In effect, I suppose you could say that anything that doesn't warrant inclusion within the full text of the report can go in an appendix if it's still appropriate. And as I think I've said before, extensive tables. So if you have tables either from a systematic review or as data analysis output, which seem extensive and don't sit comfortably within the results section, these can be put in the appendix again, as long as they're clearly referred to. Okay, the abstract tends to be written last because it's a summary of all of your chapters so far. Very important point to say here, this is not an introduction, it is a summary. And the analogy I like to use is a trailer for a film. And I'd like to think of the abstract as a very bad trailer for a film, the one that gives away all the funny moments or all the good aspects of the film. Okay, that's exactly what your review needs to be. Sorry, not your review, your abstract needs to be. Occasionally people fall into the trap of thinking it's introductory text to lead you into the document. Okay, it's not. It's a summary of each of your sections. Okay, so it should be very, very clearly formatted with a brief write-up of your background, stroke introduction, the aims of the study, the method you use to carry the study out, the results, and the conclusions. So this is just an example of an abstract. As you can see, it's a fairly small amount of text. We don't actually stipulate a minimum or maximum number of words for an abstract, but you'll soon see as you're looking through doing your literature reviews, 250 to 300 words is probably a fairly sort of industry standard for the number of words needed for an abstract. And it can actually be a very good exercise to do. It's not always easy to squeeze everything into 250 words, but it really makes you think about exactly what the important points of your document are. So it can be a very good exercise. Personally, I would say try to squeeze it into 250, 300 words rather than giving us a page and a half or 2 pages as some people tend to do. Okay, for the reader, this should just show them exactly what they should be expecting when they dip in and read your document in full, and they may well keep on referring to it again and again to make sure that the document keeps on track and is concise and succinct and sticking to the point. Okay, signposting, very important again. This is a dissertation, not a PhD thesis. So in relative terms, it's not that long, but it's up to 15,000 words for MPH students, up to 20,000 for MRes students. That's still a lot of text to go through. Okay, and when the examiner is looking through this document, it makes life so much easier if they can cross-reference and refer between sections nice and easily. Okay, so one of the first things you'll do when you start your dissertation is to agree an outline with your supervisor. So this would be your 5 chapter headers, but 5 to 10 sections as a ballpark figure within each of those chapters. So once you've got those and you've given them all a title, it's quite easy for your supervisor then to get an overall concept of the structure of your document and whether it seems balanced and heading in the right direction. Okay, and I would recommend using outline view within Microsoft Word. So to do this, you need to make sure that all of your headers actually have a format, or formatted as a header 1, header 2, header 3, etc. Once you've done that, you can view the document within outline format, and it's just a very easy way to navigate through and to give it the sort of full picture. You know, if you've got 150 pages, you can reduce it to 1 or 2 pages to see your titles with text within it if necessary. So it forms several purposes. Okay, numbering and cross-referencing. So this could be between sections. So when you're creating section headers, do try to give them a number as well as a title. So 2.1, 2.2, 3.1, 3.2, etc., etc. And then when you're referring to sections within your own work, it's very easy then to say, you know, as discussed in section 3.21a, rather than in the previous section or in an earlier section. And an examiner can then look at that section with ease. Specifically, be clear in terms of referencing for tables and figures. Again, you can apply automatic titles to these very easily within Word. Very important, because a lot of people may find that late on in the day they decide that some information is missing, perhaps on the demographics of the population you're investigating, so you need to add a new table 1. If you've already named all the other tables and you need to rename them, it can be a painful process. So if you're using automatic headers, then Word does it for you. So please do investigate all of those. Okay, and you will also need at the start of your document a table of contents, a table of tables, and a table of figures. And again, if you've applied styles to these, given them automatic headers, then this is a push of a button to create and the push of a button to update when you make changes. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so general presentation. This information will all be in your dissertation handbook. You need to write in English. The writing needs to be clearly legible. I believe there's a minimum font size of 12. The important point is simply that it's legible, clearly legible. You should have spacing between your lines, but single spacing is okay for quotes, footnotes, references, table titles, etc., etc., anything which is not within the main text. All your pages need to be numbered. The title page is number 1, but you don't have the page number actually showing. So the first page number that shows is number 2. Your tables and figures in terms of presentation, they've got to be clear. Okay, so there's an increasing trend in taking figures or potentially tables from the internet. This is fine if they're appropriate, but quite often you may find that you cannot copy them in a clear format. So please don't provide blurry tables that you've had to expand from a small picture on the internet. If we can't read it, then we can't assess it properly. Very important, all tables and figures need to be independent. And what I mean by that is they have to have a title on which says exactly what the table or figure shows. They've got to be fully labeled and they've got to be properly sourced. So the idea is that any one of these tables or figures can be lifted out of the document and yet still make sense. Okay, it shouldn't have to rely on the text to say what information is within it. Okay, having said which, you do need to talk about the table. Don't just put a table or a figure in and expect it to talk for itself. Or to be self-explanatory. It's there for you to describe within the text. Okay, so it's got to be relevant to the text and appropriately placed. I know it's one of the examiner things that annoys some examiners is if they read text about a table but can't see where the table is because it comes 3 pages later. Okay. Right, okay. I think I'm going to talk for another 5 minutes, hopefully. So a brief guide to academic writing. So these are just rules of thumb, essentially. So you should avoid colloquial language, by which I mean conversational, informal, journalistic language. So don't fall into the trap of saying something like, a government was slow to response. This was maddening, or this was unacceptable. Just remember this. This is scientific writing. Okay, so whatever language you use has to be based on evidence and not sound like it's coming out of a conversation. Precision and accuracy are important. Choose a word and phrase that best express your idea, but not necessarily in too many words. Use terminology that's common to your subject area. Don't use complex language for the sake of it. Okay, it doesn't impress. Use appropriate language, and if that happens to include large words, that's absolutely fine. But don't try to use overly complex language and expect that is impressive in any way. Okay, so make the writing formal and impersonal. So don't use I, don't use the first person. Most pieces are written in the third person, i.e. data was collected rather than I collected data. Okay, don't make sweeping statements and avoid emotive language. They can look very out of place. Okay, any statements you make, any language you use has to be backed up by evidence. So try not to expand on the evidence that's there to make statements which cannot be backed up. Okay, use short sentences, straightforward structures wherever possible. I've been one of the worst culprits of this, of using long sentences. They may make sense to you, but the reader may really struggle to get to grips with it. So wherever possible, if you've got sentences, stretching over line after line after line, just try to see if you can break it up into shorter sentences. It's generally easier to interpret. Okay, don't use, as I've just done, don't use contractions such as don't, can't, or isn't. So spell those out in full: do not, cannot, is not. And remember SPAG, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Okay, it may be fair to say there's no real excuse for doing badly on these. Okay, just check it and check it and check it again, your work. If possible, ask somebody to read through, to proofread. They may see errors that you can't. Sometimes we get pieces of work given in where the presentation, the grammar or the spelling has so many errors in that it's just impossible to imagine that it's ever been checked. It just creates a very, very bad impression of the work. And I should have said that actually in relation to presentation on the previous slide. Quite often a small proportion of the marks for a piece of work is based on the way that the work is presented. But the important point is, let's say it's 10% is applied to presentation. The examiner may have trouble in applying the other 90% of marks if the presentation is bad. Okay, so it's not just about an individual mark for presentation. The presentation, good presentation, helps the examiner to apply the other marks appropriately. Okay, so it can't be stated too strongly. Evidence. I think I've already mentioned that you all will have done the evidence-based practice module, so you'll be aware that this dissertation is an exercise in presenting evidence. Okay, I'll just read out the statement here. One of the main characteristics of academic writing is that it's always supported by evidence from literature. This means that facts, theories, and ideas from other authors should be used to back up the development of your arguments. In turn, this means that other authors' ideas must be clearly acknowledged in the text and in the reference list or bibliography. So that's really just restating the points that I've made throughout this presentation, but it probably cannot be stated too strongly. Okay. So you're providing evidence of critical analysis and you're avoiding conjecture. Okay, conjecture simply means drawing conclusions which are not evidence-based. Okay.
Should I wait with a question regarding evidence till after you're done?
No, you can jump in because I'll be moving off this slide. Yeah.
Okay. I'm considering to do an analysis of, in this case, I'm German, Germany's reaction to a UK policy. In this case, I'd be I'd be forced to analyze simply, news clippings, all kinds of informal evidence. If we are looking at the hierarchy of evidence or literature,
Yeah,
this is not peer-reviewed journals. Is this even feasible, or even
well,
something that's, yeah?
I think, yeah, quite often it can be applicable within the introductory section, to form a picture. But at the same time, if there's actually no sort of peer-reviewed evidence to back any of that up, then you're skating on thin ice, in terms of your ability to make, draw conclusions. Okay, you see, I mean, it's probably something you need to consider. I mean, we do sometimes get proposals where students say, it often depends on the format of your report as well. I've just written some feedback today to say, either show that this evidence exists, or if it doesn't exist, that perhaps for a public health report, that could be one of your points of discussion, that there's anecdotal evidence, but no systematic peer-reviewed evidence, and that could be a call for a need to create this evidence in some other way. But as I say, it can form context, but it can be difficult to write an entire dissertation based on evidence which only comes from informal sources.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the reasons why I'm struggling so much. And I was, I would so much appreciate if I could have a talk with you or anyone before I even sit down to write the proposal, because this really influences what I'm even proposing. Because I think what I have in mind is real interesting, but I'm not even sure if it's feasible or acceptable.
Yeah, well, yeah, we can do that. Maybe outside of this, we can arrange.
Yes.
If you email me, Judith, maybe
All
we
right.
can arrange a talk.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Andrew. Okay.
No problem.
Thanks.
Okay, and just to finish off this slide, just to say that you need to have very, very clear aims and objectives and hypotheses. I've already stated this at the start. But then all sections have to concentrate on those aims that you've stated. Okay. Writing techniques. I don't have a huge amount to say on this, largely because I think everybody has their own style. I've heard various techniques proposed on what can be termed power writing, which I think simply means just making sure that you get something down on paper or on the screen. What I would say is just make sure you're writing something. Okay, any thoughts that you have, get them down. You can always tidy up later. You're not necessarily writing out perfect sentences, perfectly formatted paragraphs and sections right at the start. You may simply want a stream of consciousness, just whatever thoughts you're having at the time, get them down in writing. You may forget about them, you may think slightly differently at a later date, but you can always come back to the thoughts that you've written down and start to work on them and format them properly. I would say work on sections that you can on a particular day. As I've already said, some sections are more systematic than others. So your methods, as long as you're clear about what you have done, should be simple is not or easy is not the correct term, but it's one of the easier chapters to write, in the sense that you are basically saying what you have done and being as accurate as possible. The dissertation, of course, tends to involve all the interpretation and some slightly wider thinking. And drawing things to a close. So you may find that you struggle to work on the dissertation, on the discussion section on some days. On other days, you have moments of excellent clarity, and you can apply your interpretation and conclusions. Others, you're a little bit tired, but maybe you can work on your method section, or on formatting, or on your reference section, or whatever is slightly more systematic. Some people prefer time-limited sessions, so just say I'm going to do 20 minutes a day and then stop. I'm never quite sure about that, because I think if you're on a flow, why not carry on, personally. But some people think it's better to simply say you're going to work for 20 to 30 minutes and just get into the routine of doing that and stopping. So I guess it's bite-sized chunks of work, which you may find more manageable and more easy to fit in between other tasks. Okay. Okay, so we're nearly there now for this presentation. I have, for a different presentation, the results of a survey of master's level dissertation examiners, all saying exactly what it is that annoys them the most in the work that they have had to mark. Now, there's pages and pages of returns from these examiners, but I've looked through them, and essentially a lot of repeated opinions come through. So I've tried to summarize them on this slide. Okay, so unclear objectives, as I've said before. An examiner is looking to see how well you have set your objectives and then answered those questions according to those objectives, and not strayed away talking about other material. Okay, so clear objectives are essential. Unclear objectives will leave somebody, the marker or the examiner, slightly lost within your document as to exactly what it is that they're trying to assess. Okay, which is never reflected well within the marks given. Results or texts on subjects not directly related to the main objectives. Well, I guess this is just repeats what I've just said, I think. Literature reviews that are just a list of results of papers without reference to the source material, or without critical analysis. Okay, so these are largely just making points that I've made throughout the presentation, but just showing you that there's several examiners that share the same opinions. Poor signposting, as I've said. An examiner needs to be able to move around your document with ease. Tables and figures not discussed in the text, so this has been covered as well. Don't just plonk tables and figures in and expect them to talk to themselves. You need to describe them and why they're there. Overlap of sections, so again, no interpretation in the results section, no results in the method section, etc., etc. Keep them completely and utterly separate. And general sloppy presentation. As I said, occasionally we get pieces of work where there's not only spelling and grammar mistakes, we can forgive a few of those of anybody, we make them ourselves, but sometimes where the document is just simply not formatted properly. There's text of different sizes on different pages, there's pages missing, there's no page numbers, etc., etc. It clearly creates a very, very bad impression right from the outset for somebody who's trying to mark your work. Okay, so it's worth going that extra mile to make sure the presentation is as neat and systematic as possible. Okay, I've pretty much run out of things to say, but I just want to leave this slide up. By the way, this is being recorded, this webinar, so you can look back through if necessary, and to go through these slides. You could probably request the slides actually for yourself if you'd like to. But this is just a list of further resources. Okay, I've given a very broad view of the kind of things that are expected in academic writing and dissertation writing in particular. If you look within the dissertation skills unit, there are lots more resources, okay, from within the University of Manchester. So there's academic skills support, guides on how to write scientific papers, and very specific guides on referencing and writing systematic reviews. And these are just 4 that I've pulled out from a list that was too long to put here. There are many more resources wider within the university, and of course outside of the University of Manchester, that you can probably access through the internet. And do remember that the university has a language centre which is specifically set up to help people, largely with English as a second language, but not just so, but to help people to write in a academic style in English. So you can look up the University Language Centre. I think they have their own website. I mean, we're going to try to link to this as much as possible in the future, but you can go directly to their website. They offer support in a variety of ways. Okay, so very, very much worth looking into. So I think I've pretty much used up the entire hour and I've totally dried up. So there's just 2 or 3 minutes left in case anybody wants to ask a question before we say goodbye, either by text or audibly. Okay, so I think I shall oh. Okay, I think I have half a question coming in. Isla said she'd ask, but I was wondering if you could upload the presentation. Yeah, actually, I need to ask as well. As I've just said, I think that would be very useful. We tend to put up the recording, but you don't necessarily want to spend another hour listening to me talking again. So yes, we'll make inquiries. If that does go up, then we'll put an announcement out to everybody to make that very clear. Thanks for that question. I'll take a note. Okay, I'll just count down from 10 in my head, and if no other questions appear, I shall say goodbye to everybody and thank you for joining. I hope it's been useful. And good luck in either your proposals or your dissertation writing. Yes, and thank you all. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.